So, but in a few words, SEXHUM is a project that studies the relationship between migration, sex work, and trafficking in 4 strategic sex work and migration sites in the global north. So the countries are Australia, France, New Zealand, and the US. Its main concept is that to bring migrant sex workers' own understandings of agency and exploitation to the center of debates and of theorizations through a coherent, innovative, and collaborative methodology. SEXHUM is an acronym for the concept of sexual humanitarianism, which refers to the increasing ways in which some migrant groups and individuals are targeted and understood by humanitarian concerns, policies, and interventions as vulnerable, uniquely and particularly in relations to their sexual behavior. The problem with this being that often this legitimizes very harmful anti-sex work and anti-immigration initiatives. And so the project tries to understand what works and what doesn't work within this humanitarian framing of topics and issues and realities such as sex work and migration. We are trying to do that through the combination of long-term ethnographic observations. The project hired researchers for 36 months. And so this is an ethnographically based project, combining with qualitative interviewing. So in each setting, we undertook over 50 interviews with migrants working in the sex industry. And the most innovative aspect is that the ethnofiction aspect. So in all of the 4 contexts, we did workshops, creative workshop, collaborative ones, through which we wrote scripts, fictional scripts that embody and express the realities of people directly concerned. So moving on to the countries, I'll just give you a snapshot. So Australia is the country where decriminalization is most advanced in the world, because it includes migrants on short-term visas. It allows them to work regularly in the sex industry. And this also translates in the fact that there are very low numbers of trafficking cases. We looked at the comparison between decriminalization in New South Wales, in Sydney particularly, and regulation in Victoria, in Melbourne. And we focused on moral panics that existed and were circulated mostly by abolitionist organizations, but also picked up by the media, on the supposed exploitation of Asian and cis women in non-authorized in New South Wales and unlicensed premises. We found that these claims of these people being more exploited in non-authorized and unlicensed premises were unfounded. And actually, on the contrary, a lot of, most of the people we talked to, and by people I mean people directly concerned, they preferred working in massage parlors which were not licensed or authorized, because they felt they had more of a leeway, more of power to negotiate what they were comfortable with or not. Unlike in places where sex work was exactly, licensed and sanctioned on the premise. In France, we looked at the adoption of the so-called Swedish or Nordic model to fight against the prostitutional system, which is how the French state calls sex work. We documented, so the Nordic model is based on the decriminalization of soliciting, but also coincided in France with an increase of municipal restrictive orders, which made sex workers invisible and pushed them underground in very, and actually exerted pressure on the time available to negotiate. The impact of the law was very negative. It made sex workers more precarious. People need to spend more time and do more clients for much less money. There's been an increase in violence and abuse from criminals and clients alike as an outcome, because of the fact that the industry was pushed underground, and because the negotiation time was eroded, and some people had to leave the cities where they received HIV and AIDS treatment in order to work, and they interrupted their treatment, which had very severe effects, impact on their health. I am obviously not going to talk about the US because we've got the real experts here. So the last country I'm going to talk about is New Zealand, which is heralded by everybody as the beacon of decriminalization. And indeed, New Zealand did decriminalize, sex work in 2003, but migrants are specifically excluded from work because only people with permanent residency or citizenship can work. And so even though there are low numbers of trafficking, we found diffused cases of exploitation of migrants because of their irregular status, of course, because if you do not have papers, then you become at the mercy potentially of people who employ you, who might just blackmail you, which is what we found. So our research findings strongly suggest that migrants should be included in the protections awarded by the Prostitution Reform Act by canceling Section 19 and also supporting sex workers in other ways. I don't have time to go into, but that would be a good place to start. So the wonderful research team that I was very, very privileged, and this is not a rhetorical phrases, to work with are PG Macciotti in Australia, Calogero Giametta in France, Callum Benaki in New Zealand, and in US, and you'll hear from them very soon. I work with Annie Fehrenbacher, Jennifer Musto, and Heidi Hoefinger, who will be presenting the PowerPoint and the research in the US. So we undertook more than 216 migrant interviews in each country and between 10 and 20 key informants. We also managed to undertake 10 on an average COVID-19 relevant interviews in international settings, because we thought that the project would have not been able to be relevant had we not done that, of course, because of the impact that the pandemics had on everything. And we wrote 4 ethnofiction films, of which 2 were shot, one in New York in September 2019, and one is being shot online in Paris as we speak. So tomorrow, actually right after the meeting, I'm going to go up to Paris to just make sure that tomorrow and the day after I'm going to be in charge of directing it. So in New York, we have co-written and collaborated with the Colectivo Intercultural Transgrediendo, and this is a moment in which I would like to show the trailer of the film, which is about 1 minute 45 seconds. And also I would like to honor Lorena Borjas, who is no longer with us and who really wanted this film very, very much. So I leave you with the trailer.
Nosotros tenemos nuestras cuentas de banco, compramos el café en la esquina, vamos a hacer compras al supermercado. Nosotros vivimos en Queens. Nosotros necesitamos el respeto.
Yeah, sir. Estamos despenalizando el trabajo sexual para que ninguna persona que caiga arrestada sea criminalizada ahora en adelante.
Were you ever arrested for prostitution?
Tu visa.
Estamos haciendo un film donde estamos hablando la verdad de la vida que se vive de nosotras, las chicas trans, o sea, todas hemos pasado esto. Entonces, no es algo ficticio, es algo real.
Okay, this was the trailer. I want to emphasize that SEXHUM tried to achieve a very diverse sample, and in terms of ethnicity, area of work, migration, sex, gender identity, class, and race. because racialized and sex-gendered minority are particularly targeted by sexual humanitarian intervention. And so that's something that is also reflected in the findings, which I'm going to now move on to as a way also to wrap it up. So the main findings overall is that sex work does not coincide with sexual exploitation and trafficking, and is a very important livelihood for migrants. Most of our research participants saw sex work as work. They understood and experienced exploitation in the sex industry as labor exploitation rather than sexual exploitation, and referred to specific working conditions that frame exploitation or not. And in general, humanitarian concerns and intervention tend to legitimize repressive, racialized, and extreme forms of migration control across all the 4 countries, with the partial exception of Australia in terms of not having there been an increase over there, but over the time of the project. Humanitarian concerns tend to focus on racialized migrant populations, such as Asian cis women, but they tend to neglect the vulnerabilities of other migrant groups, such as trans Latina women. There is a proportional relationship between the racialization of migrant groups and their subjection to sexual humanitarian concerns, control, and bordering. So the more people are racialized, the more they tend to be problematized and then intervened upon and controlled. And also migrant agency and exploitation tend to be embedded in collective experiences. They are not individual matters. And so in order for us to increase the agency of people, we need to really support both individuals and the communities that they live with. Last slide, in terms of policymaking, there is an inversely proportional relationship between the degree of criminalization of sex work and the ability of migrant and non-migrant sex workers to assert their rights and live their lives. So the more decriminalization, the less people are able to fight for their rights and to live their lives. Decriminalization, of course, of all forms of sex work is a fundamental starting point to counter the social and economic vulnerabilities and the violence, abuse, and exploitation that are associated sometimes with sex work. I'm sorry. And last, however, decriminalization of sex work, however, should be associated with integrative policies supporting people who are excluded from work, housing, and society according to their race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, class, and migration status. In other words, it's a starting point, but it's not the cure-all and end-all resolving all the issues. So sex work needs to be, decriminalization needs to be accompanied with measures that really bridge those traditional and well-established forms of discrimination, particularly of people who are racialized because of their race, ethnicity, gender, class, and migration status. This is it from me. Sorry if it was a bit rushed, but I need to really stop now and hand over to Heidi, who is going to now present the results of the findings in the US.
Okay. Let me share my screen here. Okay, thank you for that nice intro, Nick. For the sake of time, I'm going to be presenting the main findings from New York and LA, but I would like to take a moment to deeply thank my colleagues, Annie Fehrenbacher and Jennifer Musto, for helping put this presentation together, but also for being just really incredible, supportive co-researchers throughout this journey. Thank you. I also want to thank PG Macchiati, who helped collect data in Los Angeles, and of course, Nick, who helped collect some of this data in New York. And I finally, before I get started, I just want to say a huge thank you to the community members and community organizations that trusted us, that allowed us into your spaces, that permitted us to observe and participate. We could not have done this without you. And although this list is not exhaustive, I want to thank a few key organizations who really fundamentally provided support and help throughout this process. So it'd be Transgradiendo in New York, Glitz, Red Umbrella Project, the SOAR Institute, Red Canary Song, Community Healthcare Network, Legal Aid Society, Brooklyn Defenders, Queens and Brooklyn AP8 Courts, and John Jay College. For LA, we would like to thank SWAP LA, Trans Latina Coalition, CAST, Apait, Thai CDC, Center for Health Justice, and Midnight Stroll. There's a really nice video introduction and tribute to Lorena in the ethnofiction film, Nick, but I also wanted to take space here to remember the tremendous legacy and acknowledge the tremendous loss that we all feel about the passing of Lorena Borjas. I love this photo because it shows her doing what she does best. It was taken last year at Putas Resistencia, where Transgrediendo and Lorena had launched the Sex Workers Union. So I want to really stand in solidarity with Lorena and the Trans Latinas and other migrant sex workers, and really hopefully be able to carry on this torch on your behalf, Lorena. So thank you. I'm going to jump right into the methods now. So what I'm presenting today is based on 34 months of ethnographic fieldwork in Los Angeles and New York. We conducted in-depth semi-structured interviews with 50 community members, so sex workers, migrants, and people with trafficking experiences. We conducted 20 key informant interviews with community-based orgs, legal, health, and social service providers, and people working in the courts and criminal justice system. Due to the nature of ethnographic fieldwork, we talked to much higher numbers of community members and key informants as well. Interviews were conducted in English, Spanish, Mandarin, Cantonese, Thai, and Korean with trained interpreters. Research was approved by Kingston University IRB and City University of New York's IRBs. All participants and key informants provided informed consent, and community members were financially compensated for their time. One of the really, I think, important contributions were the ways in which we as researchers were able to really become embedded in community. Again, we thank community members for allowing that. But we conducted ethnographic fieldwork in community organizing spaces led by migrants, trans people, and people working in the sex industry. We attended political forums and social events and rallies and marches. We hung out in people's workplaces and in queer and trans bars and clubs. We participated in mobile sexual health outreach in both LA and New York. We observed the human trafficking intervention courts in New York and the regional human trafficking task force in LA. We had an incredibly diverse sample, which we're very pleased about. The largest percentage of folks in terms of gender were gender diverse. So 26 trans women and 2 non-binary. In terms of race, the largest representation was from folks who identified as Latinx, Latina, or Latino, and this was followed by Black, African, or African American. We had a very nice age range, 19 to 70 years old. Yes, we interviewed a 70-year-old worker in Los Angeles. And we had representation from 16 countries of origin, from across North America, South America, the Caribbean, Asia, and Africa. Now, in terms of findings, we were able to observe the impact of various policies and governance strategies targeting sex workers. And one of the most important findings, I think, overall, are the ways in which criminalization of sex work and migration and the stigma that results from embodying those criminalized subjectivities make it really very difficult to navigate basic systems of survival, including housing, food security, interpersonal relationships, maintaining personal safety in general. And very importantly, we have learned that the ways in which criminalization is bad for health. We have one paper that's been published for social sciences already, and another in the pipeline documenting the various mental and physical negative health impacts that result from system involvement, from beginning with encounters with police and arrest, through the booking process, through incarceration. Another important finding, which Nick has already spoken about, is the specific targeting of trans workers of color. We have learned, due to the ways that trans folks are sexualized and racialized, They are dealing with multiple layers of criminalization, of violence, of social stigma, of police profiling, and especially for folks who are migrants, because their experiences are compounded by the criminalization of not only sex work, but migration. We heard a lot about increased raids and deportation. We witnessed the events that took place around the very tragic death of Yang Song, who was an Asian massage worker, which happened after an NYPD raid. We heard about increased raids taking place on the streets in Jackson Heights after the passing of Sesta and Fosta. We heard about multiple hotel sting operations that take place in the name of anti-trafficking for the purposes of targeting domestic minors and domestic victims who are arrested and treated in multiply problematic ways often. We learned about the human trafficking intervention courts, which are considered alternatives to incarceration and a diversion program that are meant to keep people out of jail. However, we learned about the issues associated with the courts, the ways in which they're part of the larger reframing of the victim narrative. The courts disproportionately, people in the courts facing prostitution charges are disproportionately Black and Asian. We heard over and over again the humiliation associated with the court process, the lack of cultural understanding around the whole process, difficulty navigating the courts, and then meeting the demands of the required sessions. And finally, we heard, we witnessed the crippling fear that is going through migrant communities after the Trump administration and all the anti-immigrant sentiment and rhetoric that is associated with that, which led to increases in violence, surveillance, incarceration, and deportation of migrants. So Nick already talked about this a little bit, understandings of violence and victimhood and exploitation, but I just wanted to provide a little bit of data here. When we talked to participants about how they understood violence and exploitation, it was almost always associated with law enforcement, and in some cases, even social service providers. When victims did cite violence from clients or pimps, they felt like they could not go to police for fear of arrest. There was a general distrust of law enforcement in the criminal justice and immigration systems. When they talked about exploitation, it was in the context of not being paid enough by clients or even community-based organizations, which speaks to working conditions. But fewer people describe sex work or trafficking itself as examples of exploitation. For example, Skylar is a Black cis woman from New York. She started trading sex at 14. She had 3 children by the time she was 17 and arrested. And in terms of her understandings of victimhood, she states, "I never felt like a trafficking victim. Sex work was always the best option for me. I felt like I was a victim of the courts." And this is because she felt patronized, she said, by the courts, by the social service providers in some cases. She also had to drop out of college in order to complete the 10 sessions that she was mandated. In LA, we heard from Dominique, who was a biracial trans woman. She was stopped after walking while trans and had to perform oral sex in exchange for no arrest. But even in these cases of what appeared to be extreme exploitation, misconduct, still there was a sense of agency in the way that this person described their work. "For me, there's no one to blame for my choices. I made them willingly. Society says people say you're a victim of society. I say this is a real job." In terms of understandings of trafficking and being trafficked, there were self-identified sex workers and migrants that describe instances involving traffic. For them, they understood trafficking to be either crossing international borders, extreme violence or coercion to work against their will, or wage theft and extortion. But often these experiences were viewed as unique experiences that occurred in a wide range of both positive and negative experiences of working in the sex industry. And even having a pimp as a minor was not necessarily associated with being trafficked, as we learned from Sarah in New York, who was a homeless 16-year-old when she traded sex. She was stopped on the street and arrested, asked for oral sex in exchange for release. But when she was working on the stroll, she said she was stopped by someone who worked for an anti-trafficking org who then told her that she was trafficked. But she states, I didn't feel like I was trafficked. In terms of trafficking in the transgender experience, what we learned is for folks who did really experience very sort of violent trafficking, they often had to endure several arrests and long periods of incarceration before they were being offered services. For trans folks, there was often a presumption of guilty until proven innocent. So the criminalization to protection pipeline for trans victims of trafficking was prolonged. And they were often not afforded the victim offender label at the time of arrest, like many cis women. So trans people were expected to suffer before they were recognized as victims. As Anna, a trans Latina woman from LA, pointed out, after serving 12 months in prison, when she was arrested with the gang members that kidnapped and trafficked her, and 17 months in immigration detention, she was finally able to apply for a T visa, which is a special trafficking visa. But she was saying it's still hard because she still has a criminal record. She still has convictions for things that she was forced to do while she was a victim of trafficking. And she was concerned how that was going to impact her application. So just very quickly for policy recommendations, and I want to thank Kate Zen from Red Canary Song and Ashley Madness of Swap LA for helping us put together these specific regional policies. But just broadly here, listen to sex workers. They are experts of their own lives. They must be included in all stages of policymaking, research, and implementation. They must consult community-led organizations, such as the ones listed here below. Number two, we argue for the decriminalization of sex work. Nick has talked about this already, but in the specific settings, we are calling to repeal all penal code sections of criminalizing sex work and to vacate all criminal records and convictions. And finally, we're arguing that services must be made available and sustainably funded. Funding should be redirected from policing and shifted towards services for people in the sex trades, including housing, employment, education, financial management, counseling, confidential testing, and health services. These services must be made available without arrest or involvement in the criminal justice system, not offered coercively as an alternative to incarceration or other criminal penalties through the courts. And finally, fund community-based organizations run by people from the community they serve, particularly sex workers, trans people, people of color, Black people, Indigenous people, immigrants, and people with disabilities, among other groups. That's all for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Heidi. I now welcome as a speaker, Kayan Adorosho. Kayan is an author, activist, and the founder and executive director of GLETS, which means Gays and Lesbians Living in a Transgender Society. And it is an organization dedicated to creating sustainable housing and healthcare for Black transgender people. Kayan, over to you. You need to unmute. Kayan, you need to unmute.
I'm doing it right now.
Okay.
Everybody, this is very early for me to be doing this. I gotta say, here in the US, it's crazy when it comes to decriminalization and what that means. As a Black trans woman that has been doing this for over 30 years, there are two sides to decriminalizing. If you decriminalize sex work, are you gonna protect sex workers? Most stuff is done in the US and done in this country to further feed a system that's always using us. The most marginalized people that there are, and that is trans women, that is trans Latin women, that is trans women on a global level. We're underpaid, definitely. We're taken for granted, definitely. We're arrested, not giving jobs. So if you say decriminalize sex work, who gets fed for that whole policy work, who gets paid, who gets recognized, who actually can retire, all those people that did the policy work behind it. What happens to the sex worker? What happens to that person that has to survive? We're often thinking about these marijuana bills and stuff that really mean stuff to the taxes, the economic stance in this world. Sex work for us, and a lot of us have been around forever. Miss Major was a sex worker. She's 70-something years old. Renee Ampronado is a very proud and Latin sex worker who literally is still living and living her life to the fullest. Do we recognize these people and protect our people that are sex workers? When there's such separation between all communities, the Latino community, the Black trans community, we need to find a way to come together. When the white trans community seem to be able to get jobs, seem to be able to step out of sex work, they're not doing sex work for survival. We are. We are the ones being arrested. An arrest for us looks different for them. College for us looks different for them. Just going for regular employment looks different. We often get left behind when I see how we communicate as a community, how we're fighting for these very policies to be passed. We're also forgetting about the work, that sex worker, that immigrant that may not be able to get out of the detention center and what that looks like. And what I've learned from a lot of girls, especially refugees that have been put in camps, the amount of rape and abuse that is going on, they're still doing sex work within these refugee camps. When I'm getting these people, they're broken. When I'm getting these phone calls, it's sheer terror. Where's the policy workers behind that? Where are the people that are actually harming us within these detention centers, within these places of what they call politics and law? What does that do for me? Someone who, sorry, can one of y'all get that phone? What can we do to make sex work is sustainable without putting us all in jail? Just recently, they did an article and I had to tell a reporter that my housing wasn't for just sex workers. The reason why I had to say that was to protect my brand, my agency, because of Sesta and Foster, I could basically lose everything. That's also not my narrative. My narrative is for community, the umbrella of community. But people are often writing sex workers' stories, using our platforms and our pictures to immortalize their work, not the sex worker. Lorena, God bless her, diligent, fighting, that's victory. Even though she has left us, her whole platform was people, was Latina women. That platform catapulted a movement in Jackson Heights that I basically can say it. It affected all of New York City, the Bronx, Jackson Heights, Brooklyn, because she had that fight in her to sustain and keep sustaining. When we lost her, that's a huge tragedy to Liam and to the Latina community, that her love, that motherhood, that nurturing, that brand of icon and legacy is a part of what being a sex worker advocate is. It's the longevity of building. I don't know how many of you experience all of these deaths within COVID. We don't know the amount of Latina or Black trans women that have died. We have no numbers. Those are the numbers that are not counted. We have no idea how many of us were arrested, put in jail, died in jail. Those are not numbers we have. The research that are often done on us are from a higher platform. They're doing research for more money to find a way to pay themselves, but not finding a way to make the sex worker who you're living off their life. You're using their life as a catapult for notoriety, for pay, for salary. What happens to that sex worker when the film is gone? When the book is gone? What happens to their lives? When we look at cases of teenage sex workers, and one in particular from San Francisco who was horribly used, and every part of the judicial system in San Francisco had slept with this girl. If you're gonna say trafficking, we're being trafficked, what happened to every officer, fireman, detective that all slept with this little girl, threatened her family, and used her body as a tool? Well, now this little girl is a young woman, and now she is a child of her own. Where is the help now? Because now that she's raising a child, there's damage. There's damage that was passed on to her from society and from the politicians and from the very people that were supposed to protect her. As a woman of color, I often find myself in this scary area. Even now that I still have to sustain. Yes, I have an agency that has all this money. Does that mean Cayenne has money? So as a survival sex worker, I still have a clientele that I can rely on, but how many people have that? How many people can actually pay their rent? When you don't have programs like Section 8 anymore set in place, of course they don't. Of course, the program would cause, when we have all the stuff that they say we're supposed to have as trans women today, the very programs that are supposed to help everybody are closed now to trans women. So where's the help? Where's the programming? When are we gonna be able, as sex workers, to live in a house or an apartment? When are we gonna be able to go get a college degree when we gotta sell ass or sell ourselves for that brand of humanity? I've heard a judge say that, I heard them say it with me, that my sex work was violent. And that was in New Jersey. And that was a joke because there was no violence in it and there was no sex in it. And the judge was really vicious, and I wound up serving 30 days in jail. I didn't get the cushy warning that a rich socialite would get, which is prepare yourself. You're gonna go to jail. Just take care of all your business and come in 30 days. No, what I got was a lie from the DA saying I would just get a fine. And I believe this. When I realized that the courtroom was clearing out and at the end of the day, I was the last case, my lawyer looked at me and said, if you want to leave, this is a lawyer, if you want to leave, I will go with you. That was my chance to get out of that courtroom and run. And I didn't feel like I should have to run because the DA told me I was not gonna be arrested. Well, I winded up being arrested. It was the most, literally, they picked me up by my arms and threw me on the floor in front of my lawyer in an empty courtroom. Where was I going when every door was blocked? This is how we're criminalized. Needless to say, my dog, who was in my apartment, was almost 2 pounds when I got out 30 days later. The outfit that I wore to court, I couldn't even wear home because I was a fucking mess. We are not held on a platform. It's sex work. It's survival sex work. It is not murdering someone. It is not selling drugs. It is survival sex work. Not us doing it. A lot of us are not doing it because of kinks. We don't have the clientele that are the kink mode. We are in survival mode. And what does that look like for marginalized people? It looks just like that, survival. We shouldn't have to ask for that. At this stage in life, all trans people, Latina, Black, deserve more than a stimulus check. We actually all need scholarships for college, and we need a dividend, maybe 100,000 or two, because we need what we weren't able to get and locked out of because of marginalized society. Because society, the stigma connected to us from society, not from us, it's society that puts it on us. From an education stance, and I love Heidi and Nikolai for what they do for their students and lifting them and incorporating trans lives into the conversation of college. What that does for the college student that introduces something they've never known changes the mindset of somebody that may have been ignorant before. But now they're thinking, you know, I like that person and maybe I was ignorant. Maybe I need to change. Maybe we all need to change so we can create a better tomorrow.
Okay. Thank you very much,
Thank you, Diane. Thank you.
for this very inspiring talk. I think it's very important, and that, you know, that we are all acknowledging how times are mature for us to raise the stakes and to ask for more than, you know, the minimum necessary, but to actually demand you know, 100% inclusion in society, and also, you know, to catch back on what, you know, on what was denied, you know, to people who are marginalized and racialized. So thank you so much for that. And our next speaker is Liam Winslet, who is the director of the Colectivo Intercultural Transgrediendo, and is also working for the Community Health Network in New York. So over to you, Liam.
Hola, ¿cómo están? Buenos días a todos,
Hola.
todes. Gracias por la invitación y pues gracias por permitirnos este espacio, no solamente como población trans, sino también como parte de esa población de la cual por mucho tiempo hemos quedado olvidadas y pues en un sistema de precariedad donde el Estado y las cortes creen que nos salvan, pero realmente no nos salvan. Nos condenan, nos castigan, nos invisibilizan y nos criminalizan. Y yo creo que, pues, Cheyenne dijo algo muy importante, ¿no? Si quieren hacer algo por nosotras y con nosotras, es importante hacer algo orgánico con los y las trabajadoras sexuales. No podemos permitir que se sigan monopolizando el trabajo sexual con las mismas entidades que dicen hacer mucho por nosotras, pero al final del día no hacen nada, no hacen nada. Y una cosa evidente es lo que ha pasado en los últimos meses. Hemos perdido muchas compañeras trabajadoras sexuales a causa de una pandemia en la cual un Estado irresponsable, una administración no supo cómo afrontar la situación y cómo poner en alerta a las comunidades. Pero como siempre, quedamos atrás. Muchas vivimos el impacto en este momento de esta terrible pandemia. Perdimos vidas irreparables, vidas que nos impactan y que nos dejan un vacío grande. Lo que ha pasado con Lorena y con otras compañeras del movimiento en los últimos meses y en las últimas semanas. Hemos tenido que despedir a algunas compañeras que nos han dejado. Y es muy triste, es muy duro. Pero también activa nuestra furia trans ante todo este sistema machista, misogínico, transfóbico, que aún sigue queriendo silenciar las voces trans. Y pues en los últimos meses hemos estado haciendo, y lo hemos demostrado, haciendo el trabajo que le corresponde al Estado. ¿Por qué aún la comunidad trans tiene que hacer el trabajo que le corresponde al Estado? ¿Por qué aún siguen criminalizando nuestras vidas? Y cuando nos enfrentamos y les decimos cuál es la realidad, no quieren aceptar esa realidad. Y la realidad es que mientras más criminalicen la vida de una persona trans, más vulnerabilizan sus derechos. Yo hago acompañamiento a las compañeras a las cortes y para mí es muy triste tener que ver cómo alguien de mi misma comunidad tiene que sobrellevar esta presión, esta presión social, llevar este estigma. Recuerdo tanto y nunca me olvido, y cada vez que me acuerdo me molesta tanto cuando compañeras iban a las cortes de Queens y los mismos policías se burlaban de ellas. Llegó un momento en que tú te cansas y tú quieres enfrentar, pero no solamente enfrentar a la persona, sino decirle, es humana, es un ser humano. Lo que esté viviendo en este momento no merece que siga siendo una burla para ti, no merece que tú la trates de esa manera. Yo creo que son esas cosas las que nos molestan. Yo en los últimos meses, pues, he tenido que llevar con la pérdida de Lorena y pues la pérdida de estas compañeras, pero también entendí que este es el momento de ponernos en pie, ¿no? De decirle a la gente, a nuestro barrio, a nuestros condados, que las trabajadoras sexuales también somos parte de estos barrios. No pueden seguir silenciando la violencia sobre nosotras. Em, yo creo que una de las cosas que Lorena siempre me dijo y que me llevo siempre con mucho orgullo es que cuando yo llegué como migrante, porque yo también fui una inmigrante, yo llegué sin documentos a este país, también me vio obligada a hacer trabajo sexual. En un momento no lo hablaba o no lo decía precisamente por esto, por el estigma, la culpabilidad, la presión. Y llegué muy joven a este país y era muy difícil, pero ahora entiendo que la realidad es que pues muchas compañeras no tienen ni siquiera para comer. Imagínate, ni siquiera para pagar el bill del teléfono o ni siquiera para poder pagar sus rentas. Hay compañeras que han sido desalojadas de sus viviendas. Entonces ahí es cuando tú dices realmente dónde está llegando el apoyo, dónde está llegando este soporte que dicen que está para la comunidad, pero realmente no está. En estos momentos, y a pesar de la pérdida de Lorena, nos hemos levantado. Estamos manteniendo esta lucha, estamos muy orgullosos de poder ampliar nuestro espacio de trabajo, pero es precisamente por eso, para demostrarnos a nosotras mismas, no demostrarle a la gente, demostrarnos a nosotras mismas que somos capaces de generar un espacio seguro, un espacio liderado por nosotras y para nosotras, pero que también la sociedad y el sistema vean que si quieren hacer algo por nosotras, es importante que hablen con nosotras, no tomen decisiones, no busquen tratar de salvarnos, porque no queremos que nos salven. Nosotras queremos que se den oportunidades, queremos que se invierta en nuestro trabajo, queremos que generen nuevas iniciativas que permitan activar nuestras habilidades. Porque siempre digo, nosotras tenemos muchas habilidades, venimos de distintos países de América Latina y pues en este momento estamos haciendo eso, queriendo ampliar nuestro trabajo, continuar con el legado de Lorena, pero sobre todo nunca apagar esa estrella, como ella decía, ¿no? Ella decía que había muchas personas que querían apagar esa estrella, pero que no iban a poder con ella. Y eso es lo que nos motiva, una mujer latina, migrante, trabajadora sexual, que no hablaba inglés, nos demostró mucho. Casi en 31 años, Lorena hizo mucho por nuestra comunidad. Y eso es lo que no se puede apagar. Yo creo que la solidaridad de la gente en los últimos meses ha sido muy importante, ha sido muy clave para mantener este trabajo y esta lucha, pero también creo que es importante que entiendan que hay que sumarse, si estás en una posición de privilegio, en una posición de poder, trata de usarlo, trata de apoyar a la comunidad trans, pero darnos el espacio, porque nuestro espacio por años e históricamente ha sido quitado. Yo creo que el trabajo que hemos venido haciendo con SEXHUM Project ha sido muy importante, porque yo le decía a Nicola y Lorena le decía que él tuvo una oportunidad de conocer cuál es esa realidad en nuestra comunidad. Y esa es la realidad. Decía una de las compañeras en el video que esto es lo que realmente vivimos. No hay una ficción, hay una realidad. Y la realidad es que muchas de nosotras y nosotros estamos viviendo el impacto de leyes y decretos y de administraciones que siguen criminalizándonos, ¿no? Lo de Fosta y Sesta sigue siendo terrible. En Nueva York, por ejemplo, hablamos de ley y de progresos, pero realmente los derechos de la comunidad trans siguen quedando atrás en ese grupo o en ese grupo social de tercera o de cuarta categoría, cuando nosotras también somos igual que las demás categorías, de primera, siempre de primera. Y pues nada, yo creo que esta va a ser una nueva etapa de nuestro trabajo y de nuestra resistencia, pero no vamos a seguir pidiendo, no vamos a pedir más, no queremos pedir más, no tenemos que pedir más permiso, tenemos que tomarnos las calles, eh, tomar ese poder, esa fuerza que tenemos para continuar luchando. Para mí aún no ha sido fácil, me hace mucha falta Lorena, se me parte mucho el corazón cuando hablo de ella, pero creo que desde donde esté ella siempre nos está apoyando, ¿no? Las últimas pérdidas de las compañeras que se nos han ido ha sido muy fuerte, pero vamos a salir adelante. Gracias por todo.
Gracias a ti, Liam. Lo siento mucho por todo lo que está pasando, tú sabes. Yo también ahora me pongo a llorar un poquito. Pero muchas gracias por tus palabras, por tu coraje. And I'm switching back to English now. I feel immensely proud of having been able to work with Liam, with the Colectivo Intercultural Transgrediendo, and with KN, and it's been an immensely growing experience and learning experience, and my desire is that the findings of the project and the film will be useful, and that we can use them together to make lives more livable and to fight for those rights that are denied to people. I just wanted to give space to people for questions. If you have any questions for the panelists or for me, I will talk to, I will respond only to questions about the project, but about New York, and it will be Heidi, Kayan, and Liam. If you have any questions, please do. This is a unique opportunity to talk to people who have a direct knowledge of the ground and who are directly concerned. So just put questions in the chat if you have them. Right, so people, okay, one question is when the film will be available. Okay, the film is just finished, and we are now going to send it to film festivals as a way to amplify its visibility, hopefully. But we can still screen some sections for events and hoping that we don't have to wait for it to be publicly available. So, and we can always organize screenings which are not public in community settings. But at the moment, we need to wait a bit that it has the chance to maybe go to festivals, because if it is selected, then it will give the cause a huge visibility. And the concept of sexual humanitarianism, this is also for me, it's basically, it's a parallel to military humanitarianism. So when politicians justify the invasion of Iraq, they use the words of humanitarian concern, and they use the humanitarian excuses to actually legitimize what was a military occupation. This is one of the arguments. So the parallel with sexual humanitarianism is that sometimes concerns about the harms and the issues that people who work in the sex industry go through are used to legitimize and to basically also fund projects that end up being really damaging for the people directly concerned. This is in short the concept. Are there any other questions for the panelists? Well, there's lots of thanks for us. I think that it was probably a lot to take in. I mean, I was also moved and touched by both of Liam's and Kayan's interventions. If there are no other questions, I mean, I think that we could leave it here. And my question to you, it would be that, the hope rather than the question would be that we can find ways to keep working together as academics and as community members and as people who, believe in wanting to enhance the rights and the lives of everybody in very difficult, terrible times. We are not alone. We are all, we can count on each other. you know, hopefully we, after this nightmare of a pandemic will recede, we'll be able to, you know, to meet again and to keep working together as we did. Okay, so if there's nothing else, I just maybe we should if nobody else wants to say anything, we can wrap up the meeting. I have to tell you that I miss you all terribly. I've been really looking for planes in the middle of the pandemics, trying to see if there was a way to get to New York, but it was impossible. It was dangerous. But the first plane available, I'll be on it.
Liam, I love you. Raphael is gonna bring you over to my house for dinner. We're gonna talk.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I think KN, what you said before is very, very important about the fragmentation of the community, you know, of the trans community. And one of my hopes was, you know, was also to be a catalyst for, to facilitate, you know, in the little way that I can, you know, these kind of sharing of power and of experiences. And so, you know, I just hope this is gonna happen. So this is really warming for me. And I wish I could be at that dinner too, of course.
Heidi too.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, my love.
Okay. So thank you, everybody. It's been an honor to share this event with you. Thank you so much for your contributions, and let's keep talking very soon. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Gracias a todos.
Thank you.
Muchas
Gracias.
gracias, Liam. Quiero.
Bye. Besos.